In today's video, we look at Games Workshop's 1989 expansion to Blood Bowl 2nd Edition, Elves and Dwarves Dungeon Bowl. Hi folks, and welcome to the channel. I'm Lee, your host, and I'm here with Lynn.
Hello.
And we're hopping to the Wayback Machine today, going back to the mysterious year of 1989, right about the time that Tim Burton's Batman movie was released. That's probably ancient history to many of you, but I remember that time well, because it was my introduction to all things Games Workshop, including Rogue Trader, back in 1988 or so, maybe 1987, and Blood Bowl in 1988, I think, and then Dungeon Bowl in 1989. Now, as fate would have it, just before Halloween, Games Workshop announced it is releasing a new version of Dungeon Bowl, the game of subterranean Blood Bowl mayhem. Imagine a Blood Bowl / Hero Quest type hybrid where competing teams have to find a football in a labyrinth filled with treasure chests, portals, and traps, and then they have to battle their way to the end zone. So no word yet on a release date, but just in time for Christmas 2021 would not surprise me. That would be the capitalistic thing to do.
Yes, it would.
So in honor of that announcement, we thought we'd take a look at Games Workshop's original Elves and Dwarves Dungeon Bowl release from 1989, or at least some of its components. We don't have all of it, we have some of it. And also some Dungeon Bowl rules for Blood Bowl 3rd Edition, which were published in the October 1998 edition of White Dwarf. So that's kind of cool. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you may have watched us unbox my original copy of Blood Bowl 2nd Edition, and also play a few games using classic Blood Bowl minis. I think we posted 2 of those games of 2nd Edition as regular videos with the editing and everything, and then we played another 2 on live stream, but all 4 should be available on the channel. So if you're interested, check them out. So Elves and Dwarves Dungeon Bowl was released shortly after Blood Bowl 2nd Edition, and in fact, this is not really a standalone game. You really need to have Blood Bowl 2nd Edition to play it. But I remember playing this game at our local comic book shop back in 1989 when it first came out. So I had purchased my copy of Blood Bowl 2nd Edition at that same store, and also got several Blood Bowl teams cast in classic lead. But one thing I didn't pick up back in the 80s was the original Dungeon Bowl box set, which included 32 plastic figs in the same style as the Blood Bowl plastic figs. That's these guys here, so the figs are all the same. So in the Blood Bowl 2nd Edition box set, you got a bunch of humans and a bunch of orcs, and you use these little colored tabs here to mark what position they were playing. So in the Dungeon Bowl box set, you got a bunch of plastic elves and plastic dwarves, but again, just a single sculpt per team. The metal teams, however, were made up of several different sculpts. So that box set also included dungeon tiles, which you see here. We have the dungeon tiles. And plastic doors, which we don't have. Treasure chest counters, which fortunately we have a replacement for. I'll show you that in a minute. Teleport counters, pit trap counters, and other game components. So, like I said, I don't have the original box set. I don't have the box art and the figures. But a couple of years ago, I think it was on Etsy of all places, I noticed someone was selling a well-used Dungeon Bowl rulebook and also the tiles. So I picked that up. It wasn't too expensive because it's got food stains on it and stuff like that. It's kind of rumpled. But I wanted to have it, so let's take a look at that. Then we'll look at some rules for Wandering Monsters, published in White Dwarf in the 80s. And also in the 90s, some 3rd edition Dungeon Bowl rules published in White Dwarf as well.
Plus pieces.
Yeah, there's some cardstock pieces in here, which is pretty cool. So that's handy. That's going to be our replacement treasure chest counters and I think teleporter counters, which we don't have. So just worked out that way. Okay, so this rule book is kind of funny. It is only 16 pages. And at first I thought I was missing half of it. But if you look in the table of contents, it indeed only goes to page 16. So they spared no expense. So as I said before, you really need to have the Blood Bowl 2nd Edition rules to play the game. This is just some extra stuff. So really, Elves and Dwarves Dungeon Bowl is an expansion. It's not a complete new game. But I think the new version of Dungeon Bowl coming out is going to be a self-contained game. So kind of reading between the lines on the Warhammer community website, it seems like Dungeon Bowl is designed to be kind of a non-threatening, maybe gateway game that new players can jump in, particularly if they like dungeon crawlers. Get used to playing Blood Bowl, and once they've mastered Dungeon Bowl, maybe expand into the full game. So as I said earlier, the original Blood Bowl rules are not included in this booklet, but they do have some other things. For example, some additional rules for Blood Bowl to kind of expand on the second edition stuff. And rules for dwarf teams and elf teams. So these team rules were not included in the second edition rulebook, but they are included in the Blood Bowl Star Players book. And I think some of the new rules are included either in Star Players or the Blood Bowl Companion. And both of those, Blood Bowl Companion and Star Players, were hardback books that GW published to kind of expand on original Blood Bowl. So this is all pre-third edition stuff. So it takes us all the way to page 10 before we get to some actual Dungeon Bowl rules, but they start with providing various layouts using the tiles. So these dungeon tiles are not double-sided, but you can reconfigure them to make different dungeon layouts. And you also get 2 end zones, and in Dungeon Bowl, you only need to get the ball in the end zone once to win the game. So 1 touchdown. Once you find the ball and fight your way to the end zone, that's the end of the game. So Dungeon Bowl does include some mechanics you don't find in regular Blood Bowl, including teleporters. I think in the new version they're called portals. But you can hop around the dungeon with these teleporters. And if you would teleport to a pad that's already got somebody on it, then they beam out to another place in the dungeon. And in some instances, you might actually just disappear. You might beam off into the warp and never be seen again.
That would be very unfortunate.
Very unfortunate indeed. And what would a dungeon crawler be without treasure chest tokens? So there are treasure chests in the labyrinth, and one of them has the football, but you don't know which. So it's kind of a double-sided token, and some of them explode into pyrotechnics, which may cause your player injury. So you don't know what you're going to get. Plastic doors, which we do not have, though we could pilfer some doors from our Hero Quest set to use here if we needed to. So since this game is played underground, obviously there's going to be some different passing rules, so the long bomb probably isn't an option anymore. But you can bounce the football off of walls, and so there might be some interesting scatters as the elves are making up for the lack of passing ability underground by skipping it off the stone walls. And here's a pretty good idea. Once you exhaust the configurations of the regular Dungeon Bowl tiles, they suggest that you use the Games Workshop dungeon tile sets from way back in the late 80s to create new dungeons, like you see here. But those sets are kind of expensive now if you can find them used. But fortunately, there is a ton of third-party dungeon tiles available on places like Wargame Vault and Etsy and things like that. So you could pick up some of those, and as long as you have the squares that are the right size, and I think they would be, then you'd be golden. You could just make your own dungeons however you want. There's also Dungeon Bowl rules for using spiked footballs, some limitations for large monsters, and let's see, and pit traps, because why not? So that is the No Frills rules booklet for Dungeon Bowl 1989, Elves and Dwarves, but there's at least one extra set of rules in White Dwarf, probably more that I'm not aware of, but this is what we had. And those are rules for wandering monsters, because you can't have a dungeon crawl without wandering monsters, right?
What would a dungeon be without wandering monsters to keep things interesting?
Absolutely. So I guess the gist of it is that if one of your players gets within 10 spaces of a chest, then you roll for a wandering monster. And if you have the various miniatures, these are classic GW miniatures from back in the day, then you could take their data cards, make a stack, shuffle them, and then just draw randomly. Or you could just put in whatever monsters you happen to have. So for example, here is the classic Jabberwock figure from Games Workshop, but I don't have that. I don't know anybody who does have that. He's probably still available online somewhere at a premium. But fortunately, there's other things. Hippogriff, well, there's the Jabberwock again, Manticore, Wyvern, Hydra, Dragon Ogre, Bloodletters, which we have, Demonettes, which we have. I don't have an Amble, a Zote, Rat Ogre, we do have, and Giant Scorpion, which we don't have, but we could probably dig one up.
Yes.
But at the very least, we could have Rat Ogre, Bloodletter, and Demonette for our wandering monsters.
I'm sure we can find a hippogriff, too.
Yeah, might have a hippogriff somewhere. But unfortunately, no Zote and no Amble at this time, which would be epic. So as you can see, we have placed a Bloodletter here in the center of the game board. He is not a member of a Blood Bowl team, but he is representing the Wandering Monster contingent because you have to have Wandering Monsters in a dungeon crawl. So that is the Dungeon Bowl Wandering Monster rules from White Dwarf 113 from 1989, and that is one of the few gaming things I kept with me all these years. Some of my old D&D stuff, some of it worth hundreds of dollars, went into the dumpster when I went off to school, but this stayed with me because I guess...
You liked Blood Bowl.
Liked Blood Bowl. And speaking of White Dwarf, if we go back to 1998, so about 10 years after the release of Blood Bowl 2nd Edition, Jervis Johnson, the author of Blood Bowl, published some Dungeon Bowl rules for Blood Bowl 3rd Edition. So to create your Dungeon Bowl dungeon, they recommend using Warhammer Quest, dungeon tiles. These are hard to come by these days as well, but fortunately this edition does include some cardstock counters, which we haven't punched out yet, but we have a couple of end zones, and then we have these teleporter tiles, and then the chest tiles, the treasure chests. So as you can see, the treasure tiles are double-sided, and so some of them you're going to get a face full of pyrotechnics when you flip it over, and others you will find the epic spiky football, and you can then race to the end zone, battling your way through the opposing team and the wandering monsters. So that is White Dwarf 225, October 1998, with some special Dungeon Bowl stuff inside. So it's for 3rd edition, but we're going to steal those counters for our 2nd edition Dungeon Bowl game. Assuming we play one. Do you want to play one?
Yes, I want to play one.
Okay. Well, there you go then. So Lynn had asked if we might play Dungeon Bowl on a live stream, and here's one reason why not. Usually we live stream on a regular card table, but you'll notice that this layout here is much bigger than the typical Blood Bowl pitch. I think the Astrogranite pitch we have is about 28 by 15. So this game board here is about 3 feet across and about 21 inches wide, so it is larger than our live stream setup will accommodate at this time. But maybe at some point in the future we can shoot a game as a regular battle report. That would be fun. Okay, I guess that's a wrap on today's classic Dungeon Bowl retrospective, looking at some rules from 1989 and 1998, as well as some special stuff from White Dwarf. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what GW does with the new incarnation of Dungeon Bowl, which I'm sure will be on the shelf sometime relatively soon, probably before Christmas.
Probably.
That would be the prudent thing to do.
Yep.
So that's it for today, but if you have a hankering for some more classic Blood Bowl, here's a playlist you might enjoy, so check it out. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.